Country club doors gleamed like polished ivory, reflecting silk dresses and tailored suits as guests drifted inside. Just beyond the steps, a frail elderly woman in scuffed shoes and a faded wool coat moved carefully toward the entrance. A bridesmaid stepped in front of her, smile tight. "I think you're in the wrong place." A few nearby guests chuckled, low and careless. The bride's mother leaned close to someone and whispered, not quite softly enough, "We don't want people like that in our photos." A security guard was summoned. The woman's hands trembled, thin fingers wrapped around a worn purse. Not fear, just age. Her eyes, though, were steady, observing. As the guard reached for her arm, the groom stepped forward, voice even. "She's my guest." Laughter died mid-breath. The air shifted. 3 hours earlier, none of them had noticed her at all. 3 hours earlier, the country club sat in the soft heat of late afternoon, all white columns and manicured hedges trimmed within an inch of perfection. This was old Southern money, families whose names were stitched into hospital wings and engraved on courthouse plaques. Political donors, board members, people accustomed to being deferred to. The bride's family owned nearly half the county's commercial real estate, shopping centers, office parks, entire blocks that bore their quiet influence. Their development firm shaped skylines and decided which neighborhoods rose and which quietly stalled. Daniel did not come from that world. He had grown up in a narrow brick house 2 counties over, scholarship kid, first in his family to graduate college. He built his reputation blueprint by blueprint until the bride's father brought him into the firm for his talent. He was respected, valued, but never fully claimed. That morning, the elderly woman had walked the perimeter alone, studying new stonework, pausing near a recent addition. She listened more than she spoke. Margaret Vale preferred it that way. No photographs, no interviews, just ownership. By the time the whispers began inside the reception hall, she had already seen enough. The music faltered first, a trumpet note trailing into nothing. As heads turned toward the entrance, the bride's mother straightened her spine and stepped forward, her smile stretched thin. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," she said, voice sweet but sharp at the edges. Around her, guests pretended sudden fascination with their drinks. A champagne flute trembled in one woman's hand, bubbles breaking against the rim. A pearl bracelet clicked softly as its wearer folded her arms. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He moved closer to the elderly woman instead. "Mom, would you like a seat? Some water? It's warm out here." His tone was steady, almost gentle. The bride caught his sleeve and pulled him aside. "Daniel, this is embarrassing," she whispered, eyes flashing toward the crowd. The old woman said nothing. Wind lifted wisps of her thin gray hair. She studied the faces in front of her one by one. Behind them, a groomsman muttered, probably scouting for handouts. The bride's father began walking over. The bride's father approached with the careful smile of a man used to controlling rooms. Up close, the irritation showed in his jaw. "Mom," he began, smoothly, pulling a white envelope from his jacket. "Let's make this easy. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere more appropriate." He extended the envelope between 2 fingers. Daniel's shoulders tightened. He didn't look at the money. The old woman did, but only briefly. She made no move to take it. "Sir," Daniel said, voice level, "she doesn't need charity." A murmur moved through the guests like wind through dry leaves. "Who does he think he is?" Someone whispered. The father's smile thinned. "Daniel," he said quietly, "you work for my company. Let's not forget that." There it was, clear, measured, public. The old woman's hand steadied against her purse. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried. "I was invited." The father blinked. "By whom?" She turned her gaze to Daniel, and Daniel made a choice. Daniel didn't hesitate. He offered his arm as though escorting royalty. "Please," he said simply. A few guests gasped under their breath. The bride's mother reached out as if to stop him, then thought better of it. The crowd parted in reluctant silence, heels scraping softly against polished floors. He led her past the sweetheart table, past the glittering centerpieces, and seated her beside his own parents near the back. Not among donors, not among board members, with family. Across the room, the bride held her smile for the photographer, jaw tight enough to crack enamel. Dinner was served. Conversation resumed in careful fragments. The old woman dabbed her napkin once, then began asking questions. Not small talk, zoning variances, the delayed waterfront permit, the pending acquisition on Maple Street. Daniel answered cautiously. At the head table, the bride's father stopped eating. His fork hovered midair. She wasn't guessing. She knew details that never left executive meetings. Eventually he stood. Coffee arrived in delicate porcelain cups, steam curling into the heavy air. Conversations thinned as the bride's father approached their table, smile gone now. How? He asked carefully. Would you know about Maple Street? The old woman reached into her purse. When she withdrew the paper, it was crisp, uncreased, official. She unfolded it with steady hands and turned it toward him. Do you recognize the signature on your most recent land expansion contract? He glanced down, and the color drained from his face. At the bottom of the page, beneath his own bold signature, sat the name of a holding company no one in the firm had ever met in person, Vale Infrastructure Holdings. The name settled over the table like weight. Daniel looked between them, confusion tightening his brow. The woman removed her glasses. I believe, she said evenly. We've been partners for 12 years. No one moved. Then she began to stand. She stood without hurry, smoothing the front of her faded coat, as if adjusting silk instead of wool. There was no raised voice, no grand gesture. My name, she said, clear and steady, is Margaret Vale. A sharp inhale came from somewhere near the bar. An older guest muttered, It can't be. Phones appeared beneath tables. Screens glowed. A grainy Forbes profile surfaced, no photograph, just a name and numbers that seemed almost abstract. Estimated net worth, billions. Primary shareholder in multiple regional development chains, including this one. The bride's father's fingers trembled against the edge of the table. Not dramatically. Just enough to rattle porcelain. Daniel exhaled slowly, as if something unspoken had finally settled into place. Margaret's eyes found his. You were the only one who treated me like a person, she said. The room shifted without sound, and then the collapse began. The bride's mother tried to recover first. Her lips stretched into something resembling warmth. Well, she began lightly. What a surprise. No one joined her. The bride's father stepped forward, words tripping over themselves. Ms. Vale, had we known, please, this is a misunderstanding. His earlier certainty had thinned into something brittle. Around the room, guests who had laughed minutes before suddenly studied their plates. One man slid his phone back into his pocket, as if it had burned him. Margaret glanced at the white envelope still resting on the table. She nudged it back toward him. Keep it. Then, candidly, she addressed the room. For some time I've been reviewing successions. I have no children, no heirs. I was undecided. Her gaze moved to Daniel. If character is legacy, she said, I believe I've found one. The bride looked at her groom then, not with affection, but with calculation. The air tightened. And the consequences were only beginning. The shift did not happen overnight, but it happened swiftly. Within weeks, Vale Infrastructure initiated a restructuring review of every shared holding. Auditors walked through offices that had long operated without question. The bride's father was asked to attend a special board meeting. By the end of it, a vote, led quietly by Margaret's controlling shares, removed him as CEO. The announcement cited strategic realignment. Then the emails surfaced, internal messages discussing undesirable tenant profiles and coded language about steering certain applicants away from premium properties. Once forwarded to compliance officers, they triggered a formal investigation. Several contracts were paused. Pending expansions froze mid-permit. Daniel was not handed anything. He sat through interviews with independent board members, answered hard questions, submitted proposals. Only after a formal vetting process was he offered a leadership role. Meanwhile, a wedding guest leaked the confrontation. The photos spread quickly. Commentators debated class prejudice and corporate entitlement. Margaret responded not with statements, but action. She established a foundation for ethical development and housing equity. Board policies were rewritten. Anti-discrimination clauses strengthened. It wasn't revenge, it was reform. 1 year later, Daniel walked through the courtyard of a newly opened housing development on the east side of town. Brick buildings, modest but dignified, wide sidewalks, a playground already echoing with afternoon laughter. A small plaque near the entrance read, "Funded by the Vale Foundation." Margaret stood beside him, thinner now, leaning lightly on a cane as she studied the blueprints he held open. Her hand still trembled, but her eyes remained sharp. The bride's family name no longer appeared on company letterhead. Quiet exits, clean transitions. Daniel had never asked for inheritance. He had earned something rarer, trust. Margaret glanced at the children running past and said softly, "Power reveals people, so does poverty." Daniel nodded once. There were no cameras, no speeches, just the steady sound of work continuing. Kindness costs nothing until it costs everything. In a room overflowing with wealth, influence, and polished reputations, only one person chose dignity over appearance. Only one stepped forward when it would have been easier to look away. If you had been standing there, watching it unfold, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up, or would you have stayed silent like the rest? Real character isn't proven when the spotlight is on. It's revealed in quiet moments. When someone appears invisible, tell me your honest answer in the comments. And if you believe integrity still matters, stay with this channel.